Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment. Scott McCrady joins us. He is the Chief Executive Officer for SolCyber Managed Security Services. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Greg. Thanks for having me.
We'd love to hear about your journey, how you got started, why you got started in this wonderful field of technology, and what led you to being CEO for an MSP, or an MSSP, I guess I should say.
Yeah, I know I have like the traditional but non-traditional story. The traditional side is, I was an engineer by trade, right? So I came out of university and networking and security was sort of the new thing. And I got put into there. But one of the unique parts of my background is the university I went to was a very small school, but they mandated 4 years of speech course. And as an 18-year-old college kid, I thought this was the worst idea ever. Why would anyone need speech course when you're a technologist? And it ended up being obviously one of the best things ever because as I started working, I kept getting put in front of more customers. And then that ended up in a way getting me hired into the very first MSSP. So this is 25 years ago, brand new concept, the managed security service provider. But as these firewalls and IDSs were coming online, no one knew what to do with the data. What do you do with it? We had NOCs, but we didn't have any SOCs. And so I ended up getting moved into there. Really lucky. We ended up working for Symantec, which became the world's largest MSSP. Got sent to Sydney, as I joke, the world's best job to build out Asia Pacific and Japan. So built that out and then ran Symantec's global MSSP business. And then went to a company called FireEye Mandiant, built out their MSSP business. And then based on lessons learned from doing this for 20 years or so, we started SolCyber, which is really an effort to take core MSSP services like security log monitoring and up-level them to a sort of a security programmatic approach that allows for companies to have a more easy way of having a security program in the same way that we sort of shifted from data centers to cloud without having to do as much of the heavy lifting.
So you mentioned something very interesting in that history, and you talked about speech courses in college. And the reason why I kind of ping on that is you don't normally would think about that when talking about IT and technology and cyber and all that. But I have often said, and I actually said this on a LinkedIn post earlier today, that probably one of the most important certifications I ever got had nothing to do with technology. It was the competent communicator through Toastmasters. Because as you said, we get in front of people, we get in front of customers, we get in front of colleagues, we get in front, if you're talking about being a CISO level, you get in front of executive management, the board. You need to be able to speak, but you need to be able to listen too. And I don't know about you, but when I was going through the Toastmasters stuff, part of the speaking course was learning how to listen more effectively. Is that the case when you went through?
100%. They structured the speech courses on the Toastmasters and sort of put their own spin on it. But you'd be very familiar with the speech courses that we took. And then coming out of there, I did some continuing education in the Covey, way back in the day, Stephen Covey management courses. And when you combine those two, it really forces you to ask the right questions and sort of try to pause the mind and listen to what people are saying in return. And of course, that helps on almost every level. It helps in talking with your colleagues. It helps in business proposals. It helps with customers. And as you said, board level meetings and things like that.
And I know this is a little bit of a tangent from how I usually take this, but the reason why I wanted to go down that path is that there's a lot of folks trying to either get into IT or cyber, or they're trying to change positions, or they've been riffed or along those lines. And there's always this constant question, how can I stand out? And people talk so much about certs and this and that. It's like sometimes you have to, and I hate using sayings like this, but sometimes you have to think outside the box and think about how can you make yourself more marketable? You're going to be working with people. Think about that.
Greg, it's a 100% accurate point. I use a term called talent stacking,
like
which means that obviously, whatever, in our case, being a really good security analyst or security engineer matters. But we can train on a lot of that. There has to be some obviously base level experience, but we are all used to in the Western society sort of going through school and being trained on technical, whether or not that's being a really great English history person, or obviously being a great security engineer. What oftentimes are not very well trained in is what I like to call the things that make the whole company go round, which is communication and interactions, positive thinking. We all know that when you're around people that are like, yeah, this is difficult, but there's a way to get through this, or there's a way to make this better. Creative thinking, and then the basics around just like bringing value add to the job. These are all things that aren't really well taught, that you sort of have to go teach yourself, unfortunately, in a lot of ways. But if you do, it makes you almost irreplaceable. And companies are willing to spend the time to train you up on technical components. What most companies are not super great at is training people up on soft skills. Again, whether or not that's, and they're not very good at saying, hey, we need you to be a force multiplier. They're not very good at that. What they're very good at saying is, here's your test on being a security analyst. You got a 70, keep studying. We need to get to a 90. And so I tell people, if you work on these talent stacks, the odds of being successful in your career are almost 100%. I don't know many people that are positive, can do spirit, always trying to figure out a way to make things better, work well with others, and also obviously do their job, that have problems.
Absolutely, and that often comes out in the interview when bringing a candidate in, and sometimes like the experience, the certs, whatever, will get them in the door. But anyway, I appreciate that segue into that, because I know that's an important topic. But I did want to ask, so with SolCyber, I would imagine that you have clients. We'll talk a little bit more about what SolCyber does, but is it fair to say that you have clients in the small and mid-sized business space?
We do.
So from having seen that, and plus in your history, you probably have a very good perspective on this. As a side note, now that we were talking about speaking, I'm trying to make sure I don't say and ahs all the time.
There you go.
I talked myself into it. From your perspective of having worked with small and mid-sized businesses, what would you say right now is one of the more, or a couple of the more significant threats, cybersecurity-wise, to small and mid-sized businesses today?
There are a few. The first one, which is still unfortunate because it almost forces the industry to do things that we don't really want to do, but there's still this belief that they're not really a target. It's amazing the number of 500-seat companies, 300-seat companies I talk with who are like, yeah, we know that happened to so-and-so. We know that happened to, a hotel chain in Vegas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But why would the bad actors come after us? What do I have? Or, if I get shut down for a day, we could probably survive. And it really almost forces us to move into this FUD territory, because we see breaches literally every day. We're talking to customers that are like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I'm miserable. It's costing me lots of money. I hope I can stay in business. And so it forces us to say, you're really underestimating the threat. And none of us really want to sell that way. And we don't want to talk to customers that way. I personally talked to multiple customers this year that we've talked about a security program approach to security, and they've been breached after the conversation. So there's still this disbelief that something bad is going to happen to them. And that, as you can imagine, causes this chain reaction of poor decisions around security. And so the first thing I would say is, if you're 300 seats, 500 seats, quit thinking tools. The way you should not be managing your budget is saying, this year we're going to get an extra $20,000 and I'm going to go buy a tool. Tools are needed. But the problem isn't that organizations don't have the right tools. If you look at, again, these large hotel chains that just got breached, or Clorox, they've got the tools. They even have the people, more people than small, medium business does. They're not hanging things together in a way that allows for those tools to be effective against a set of processes, and then have that done in a repeatable, consistent manner that gives a very high probability of catching bad actors.
So you talked a little bit beforehand about that the small and mid-sized businesses have this perception that we're not a target, and perhaps digging into the soft skills and the positivity as well that we just talked about earlier is one way to help to convince them that that's not the case. And I want to be clear about this first when I say that. It's like when you're coming from either from my perspective as a virtual CISO or your perspective, managed security service provider, when I use the word convince, it's not convince from the aspect of trying to make a sale. It's
Right.
convince from the aspect of trying to, I mean, I think that it's fair to say that most of us in information security, we're here because we want to try to make a difference. And so when we see a business that's like, has that attitude, oh, it's not never going to happen to me, we really feel that passion to want to get in and to change that attitude.
Yeah.
How would you recommend doing that?
It's funny, we talk about that on a regular basis, Greg, and you're 100% correct. When you've been doing this as long as we have, which is now coming up in 25 years, you've seen so many, you've got so many battle scars from seeing so many horrible situations. And you listen to these companies, and we try to use all kinds of different analogies. The one I used sometimes is like getting your car towed. It's just so unpleasant, right? It's unpleasant on every level. It's the money, it's the time, it's the energy, it's the place you have to go. But what I've personally found is it is very, if people don't think they're at risk, it is very hard to convince them they're at risk, because I think they've been inundated with the FUD for a long time, because it's real. The FUD is real. The insurance industry, cyber insurance industry, says the last 6 months has been six of the worst months from cyber attacks in the last 2 or 3 years.
Right.
So we know it comes in waves, but it's bad out there right now. So what we try to do is talk more business. And I'll be honest, we have variable success on this, but we're like, okay, we get it. You're probably not going to be breached. But if you were, like, how long could you be down before it was a major problem? Who would you call, like, to help you? So we try to work more through the business and just say, do you have all the pieces in place? And sometimes it works, but candidly, it's difficult. If people are like, I've got AV and a firewall and I'm probably pretty good, and you're trying to tell them that that's not sufficient, that identity is the core attack vector right now. Attackers log in, they don't hack in. They just go, I don't even know what that means. And so that really is, I think, the core challenge we are facing is as an industry, as we try to help SMBs who really desperately need the help.
Well, you've touched on something that is, I believe, so important, and that is just in general, security folks will get a lot more traction if they learn and execute on talking in business language, because the C-suite or whomever your contact is there when you're making initial contact, they're not going to want to know or care about how many threats that you've stopped. Hey, our firewall stopped 82.5 million threats last month. Well, gee, good for you.
Right.
What does that mean to my business? So I agree there, and I also agree with the part that you said that sometimes it's almost impossible to get through anyway. If they're dead set on the idea that, well, we have a firewall and that's fine. Unfortunately, sometimes I see that, you may or may not agree, but sometimes I see that as they would prefer not to know and just move forward. And unfortunately, there are several ways that you can treat a risk, and I'm not going to run through them all, but putting your head in the sand is not one of them.
That's right. That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about SolCyber. You have on your website, you call it the first modern MSSP. What does that mean?
So to keep this really tight, the traditional MSSP model is the customer goes out, works their way through X number of technologies. They figure out what they need to protect themselves against the bad actors. They update that on a regular basis. They send the data to the MSSP. The MSSP looks at it 24/7 and sends them alerts back. The alerts oftentimes are not super helpful, but that's been the traditional model. Having dealt with hundreds of breaches over 25 years, maybe thousands, the problem we saw was that there was this massive gap between the tooling and the technology. Do customers actually have the right stuff that actually protects you against the threat today, not 3 years ago? Are they being run in a consistent manner? If you want to see our customers' eyes roll over, talk about a concept of operations, but you get it. Like, you have to have a concept of how you run this stuff. And then 3, you have to have the right people that do that on a consistent basis, again, with the knowledge of what's happening in the threat industry. And so what we did was we took this core idea of managed security services, and we extended it to what we call a security program as a service. So if you're a mid-sized customer, you at bare minimum, you have to have one or two people just even buy the tech and run the tech. But then are you running it the right way? Do you need to change it? Who's monitoring it? What happens if something bad happens? So all of that, we've consolidated all that into a drop-in security program using best-in-class technology, but at a price point that's very easy for a mid-market customer. So we basically say, you can start, there's a journey, you can start at something simple, but at the end of the day, get out of the business of building security programs. It's not what you do. It doesn't even make sense for you to do it. Have us just drop in a security, and it's going to be cheaper, faster, and significantly more effective.
So do you focus primarily on the technology aspect of a security program, or do you extend beyond that to policy and risk management and that sort of thing?
We focus on the operational security components. And so one-time installs like MFA, we will help. But what we're really saying is there's a set of things that have to be run consistently. And if you run those things consistently and gather the data consistently and analyze it the right way, then you can have a very high chance of understanding when something bad happens and stopping it. We will then tie that into companies' risk and compliance. So if they're going through SOC 2 Type 2, we're about to launch a CMMC service. So we'll tie into different controls and say, this will help you cover these controls depending on the regulation that you're trying to ascertain. And candidly, Greg, one of our biggest customer verticals is what we call supply chain compliance. And so it's like movie theaters are demanding that the post-production companies have a set of security that's significant. And so they will use us, and then we'll give them a bunch of data on how to help fill out their audit for their larger customers, things like that.
So I like to sometimes, whenever I'm talking with a potential virtual CISO customer, a prospect, I like to try to frame things in the terms of the 3 lines of defense model. I know not everybody's familiar with that. Are you familiar with that concept?
Yes.
Okay. So just for those who are listening or watching who aren't familiar, and I know I talk about it periodically, but first line basically would be operational IT security controls. And it would seem that that's where you all fall. That's your forte. Second line would be the risk management side. And that's where you were talking about that you integrate with the company on that, right?
Yeah. Right.
And then third line being audit, you're making sure that when do you ever talk directly with auditors when they come in?
We do.
Okay, so that's good. So
Yeah.
you do have that I like to call it like a translation in a way where an auditor might ask, well, how is this control? How is this technology meeting this requirement for the SOC 2?
Bingo. That's right. And we have that documented, and we also have, not on every control in the planet, but again, we'll have customers that have a bank or a movie, whatever, some large company say, these are our rules that you have to, and then we'll take a look at those and we'll say, yeah, we help you across, whatever, 35% of these, and this is how we do it. And if they need to talk to us, we can set up a call. And that's all that value add. When I say, again, why are you running a security program? That stuff's difficult for 500 seat company to go do, right? Even 1,000 seat or 2,000 seat companies, let alone 500 seats or 200 seats.
Well, I mean, to your point, and what I see an awful lot is that people have gone down the path of buying all these different tools. Sometimes they have the staff to be able to manage it. Sometimes they don't. But regardless, it's like the stuff that comes out is almost non-actionable. And also you get to the point where you might have like overlaps of controls in one area and a gap in another area, and you have no idea. So,
Greg, I'm gonna have you come talk to every one of my customers. we will talk to them, and they're like, you're like a fence, and you've built overlapping fence pieces here, and then you've left a gap, and then you got another piece of fence, and then that one's overlapping slightly, and then you got a gap. And they bought tools, and what happens is every year they get a budget increase of X amount, and they go out and buy a tool, but it's not hung together. Even the large customers we talk to, 20,000 seats, 40,000 seats. This is a very common statement. We got an MDR solution reporting to the vendor MDR. We have a SIM, we have an MSSP, and we have a team. And I said, well, who consolidates all that? And they're like, the team sort of does. But at the end of the day, they have data going to 4 different locations, none of whom are talking to each other. Different tools, different technologies, different processes. And there's a group in the middle that's humanly trying to pull it together, and they're failing. So again, if you step that down to 500 seats, 1,000 seats, or 300 seats, it just doesn't make sense.
So I from a practitioner standpoint in the risk management space, I really love this approach, and let me explain why. Um, I deal with this. We deal with this in our firm constantly when we're evaluating the initial tool stack of our new clients or what have you,
Hmm.
and we ask about inventories and what is this doing. Just the concept of what we're trying to get at
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
very hard. IT typically has a desire, they want to get things working and they want to make sure
Yes.
that they're working. Asking IT to take a step back and take a more holistic approach, it's not that they can't do it, it's that they don't see the point a
Right.
lot of
Yep.
times.
Yep.
And it's because they're doing a different task and they have a lot of, I mean, I can't do what they do.
Right.
So being able to drop that in with, as you say, not being able to rely upon the internal company having that resource or that skill set, that's the word I was looking for
Hmm.
before, I think is hugely important. And I love that. I love to see that because I love how that's evolving the whole MSSP space.
It is, and we talk about it all the time. There are amazing tools out there, but like you know, if CrowdStrike versus Sentinel-1, we have like what Proofpoint versus Mindcat. Like we can go down the list of all these things. But again, the problem is the way all the pieces are hung together, so that a set of people that do this for a living can actually action the information. I love the action word. And
Hmm.
then if you do that right, it now enables these follow-on. The reason why customers love us once they get on board is because of like the audit question. They love the fact that they're protected, they sleep well at night, we find bad actors, we clean it up for them. Like they love getting that off the plate. But we just had a customer go through a massive audit with a movie company that develops movies or post-production. Um, 3 people on site for them. We helped them with probably 30-40% of that. And they're like, it's so, and their customer raved about the solution and that it was so easy to understand and they understand how it was hung together. They understand how we operated. We had documentation. And so that's the type of stuff where you're trying to explain this to customers, why this matters. And the ones that get it, they're like, this is the best thing I've ever heard, right? This is the best thing since sliced bread. But a lot of people are still stuck in the very day-to-day activity. We get it. We understand. We've all been there. But we do. It is nice to get them to lift up a little bit and understand that isn't it nice just to get this off your plate and have it operationalized?
Yeah, the carrot, if you will, it's like I won't have to come to you nearly as much asking you for screenshots and evidence because we know where
Yes,
everything is. We don't have to ask you, like we don't have to go whittle through to try to figure out what would be the best evidence. So,
that's right.
well, there's a lot of stress involved with whether or not you're helping a company with their information and cybersecurity needs, whether you're running a company as CEO. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast that I think that in our industry, we sometimes try to push ourselves too much because we can be very passionate about what we do.
Hmm.
And yet we forget that we need to take a step back every now and then. We need to decompress, recharge to be the best that we can, keep our mental health going straight. What's one of the things you do to step away and decompress?
I love this question. I am very passionate. Like if I had a second career, it'd probably be in biohacking or something like that because
Hmm.
I'm very passionate about health. And the I just see it all the time. I saw it when I was younger. My dad was a minister, so we saw a lot of people that were very sick, uh, and it really cemented this idea that if you don't have your health, like things could. We saw so many people that life was going on a trajectory and they're doing what they're doing, then their health fell apart, and then everything falls apart.
Hmm.
So what I tell everybody, and obviously what I try to do is you really have to take a little bit of time um, to step back and say, what do I need to do to get my health under control?
Hmm.
Um, and there's some real basics. Like it's the 80-20 Pareto principle. If you do a few of these things, you're going to get 80% of the benefit. And so you've got to lift weights. I know that people are like, what, lift weights? I won't go into all the reasons why, but the data is very, very clear. It's very clear over the last 15 years. Muscle deteriorates, bone deteriorates, the ability to maintain your balance deteriorates. Weightlifting offsets almost all of that.
Yep.
I'm not saying to get huge and bulky. I'm just saying to maintain some structure and your posture and the strength of your body.
No.
and then
I
move.
just interrupt for a second. I
Yeah,
get it. And I
yeah,
always say that the
yeah.
reason why that I work out now at 56 is because I want to be able to get off the toilet myself when I'm 90 years old. And
That is
but it's
100%
exactly true, because what you're
that's right.
talking about as far as like bone density and balance, which is a huge
Balance.
thing,
Yep.
it has nothing to do with focusing on the major muscles to make yourself look. I mean, I've
Yeah.
been
None
married
of
for
us are
so
going to
many
be
years, I don't need to,
Arnold, right?
yeah. But it's all about the balance. It's all about the quality of life. So I'm sorry,
Yep.
I needed to just opine on that.
It's 100% true. Limit your sugar,
Hmm.
and then do some sort of. I was lucky. I got into fasting like 20 years ago, so I fast every Monday. So from Sunday night dinner to Monday night dinner, before it was a thing. Now it's a thing, but the ability to just like cut back on a period of time. You don't have to do 24 hours. You can do 12 hours or whatever. You give
Hmm.
you give your body a time to clean up and process. If you do those three things, walk a couple times a week, go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week, and then limit your sugars, you're going to be at the 90th percentile of humans in America.
Well, we might have to have a follow-up podcast on biohacking. So what are
I
your
would love
future
it.
plans? What are your future plans outside of biohacking?
I mean, SolCyber is it's my company, right? So it's sort of all encompassing. And so the goal really is to say, how do we continue to help organizations protect themselves in the easiest, most efficient manner? We are constantly thinking about how do we lower the friction to help companies get something in place that we know is going to protect them, so that they can then get themselves to a place where they're not worrying about it. Security programs and being built by companies doesn't make any sense in 2024. We just are trying to spend our time trying to figure out how to convince companies of that. Obviously, it's good for our business, but we've been doing this so long, it's the right thing for the industry.
Very good. Well, Scott, it's been wonderful having you on today. This has been a great conversation. I mean, everything from managed security, service provider growth to biohacking. And like I said, I could have gone down that path, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Greg, it was a pleasure. Look forward to doing it again soon.
All right. And everybody, stay secure.